Welcome everybody to our Sunday live stream. We are making this a now regular occurrence every Sunday evening, and I want to thank all of our subscribers and our viewers for tuning in tonight. As you can see on screen, we have our very own Captain Swiss, a guest, a friend, known to myself and to a number of people connected to Youth Views. Captain Swiss, is that how you like to be known, or is Swiss for short, or?
Swiss will do. It's normally either Swiss or Captain, but I'll take Swiss. No need to be formal.
Excellent, brilliant. So yeah, first of all, I want to welcome Swiss to our show. Swiss is and I'm sure he'll be able to introduce himself in due course, but Swiss is a political YouTuber. He set up a YouTube channel some years ago and is well known on the circuit in terms of social media and political discussion. But I'm sure when we get going, he can give himself an introduction worthy or better than the one that I have been able to give him. Before we sort of start, Swiss, I just want to sort of say on Remembrance Sunday, it wouldn't be right to sort of get into anything without remembering all of our comrades and soldiers who have died fighting for the country. We sort of remember them in this stream. I'm not necessarily going to go into, I don't think we need to necessarily do minute silences or anything, but I think it's fair that we remember them on this show and remember their contribution. And we wouldn't be here today being able to do the things that we are doing without the sacrifice of those individuals. So I just wanted to sort of get that and mention that first. I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that, Swiss, yourself. Yeah.
I'll just say basically just to echo what you said on it. And I like the fact that, as far as I'm aware, at least for this stream, it sounds like you're sort of mentioning Remembrance Sunday, but probably not any other. It seems every year when it rolls around, there's always one camp or another trying to politicize it for one means or another. So I think sometimes it's good just to mention it, but not have to try and put a specific slant on it or try and use it against a person. Yeah.
So yeah, without further ado then, Swiss, I'll just give our viewers a little bit of history. I mean, obviously from my perspective is that our channel has been running for nearly sort of just over 3 months now, I would imagine. My sort of interest in this, and I'll be absolutely totally blunt, is that in terms of my political interests, I found myself getting really frustrated with just bottling everything up in terms of politics. And sometimes you hear about the dishonesty in politics, and I'd bottle a lot of it up, and then I'd try and sort of, if you like, try and maybe vent off to family members and my partner and whatnot, and she has no interest in politics whatsoever, so it was like talking to a blank face, really, to be fair. So and the major sort of frustration was that I mean, I'd get really excited whenever I'd met somebody who was sort of younger or even younger than myself that had any remote interest in politics or talking about, you know, whichever side of the sort of politics sphere you want to look at. I'd really sort of engage with it and be quite excited, because it isn't something that everybody talks about. Let's be honest. So I then decided to set up our sort of politics, like as a fan channel, really, and call it Youth Views, with a view to trying to get young people, give them a platform really to sort of talk about and stream and whatever their views were, just to basically jump on and have a conversation, and at the same time on a personal level maybe vent out some of those frustrations and views that maybe I had. And I have to say, if I look at sort of it personally, Swiss, it's worked quite well. I find myself in terms of my day-to-day life, whenever I feel that I need to talk to somebody about this, I feel like I can just jump on a stream and talk about what I need to do and get off the chest. And actually debating is healthy. I welcome somebody who comes back to me and says, "Oh, actually, Harry, don't agree with that," because then it just lets that, for me, it let that kind of frustration out, having to, rather than bottle everything up. So as I say, I mean, we're hitting 67 subscribers in sort of as of this week on the YouTube channel. In terms of followers on the Twitter, I think we're hitting about just over 800 or 850. I can't remember exactly. And by the way, the Twitter handle for everybody is at YouthViews with a Z. Yeah, that's about there. So that's our sort of background. And then just in terms of my interaction with yourself, Swiss.
People have called me much worse, don't worry.
Purely accidental. Swiss, I actually should have bumped into you a lot sooner, but I was added into a group of young people, mostly young people, I must say, who were we call, I think we can call them the Bullet Club, can't we? I'm sure you'll allude to that in a few more minutes in terms of the formation of that. I was added to that group by a couple of individuals who I was part of in another group. And that was absolutely, for me, that was fascinating. I mean, in terms of, this was the first time in my life that I'd seen, I mean, there's about 45 people in there, isn't there, Swiss, I think?
Getting on for, yeah.
Yeah. And to see, and we're not talking about just a group. I mean, literally, these guys on the in the Bullet Club, they're rolling comments every day. It's through the day. It doesn't stop. It was non-stop. And I was absolutely, again, my excitement, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I mean, actually, that sounds so wrong, but you'll know where I'm coming from.
I know what you mean. It's like a constant stream of consciousness, that chat, isn't it? It just never seems to end, does it?
And you know, the great thing for me, what I found about the Bullet Club was that actually, if you don't need to watch the news at 9 o'clock in the evening, if you want to know what's literally going on through the day, I mean, like within 5 minutes of time, the tweets are coming in. It was literally, and I mean, especially when we were talking about when Parliament was running and there was sort of votes happening and whatnot, just the absolute sort of accuracy of the news being shared. I was really real joy to be part of that. Now, I only found out later that actually you were the master or forming of that network, and because you were in your little break, weren't you, your sabbatical, so to speak. And so I met you, obviously online, Swiss, quite late in the day. It's probably been about a month, isn't it, really, since you've been back? I mean, remind me, how long have you been back?
Oh, I think it was some point in late September. I came back to YouTube after a bit of a break. Had a few things to manage, moving house and the end of a relationship. So it was, everyone needs a little break from the tubes every now and then.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. I think you were added in the meantime, so we've only really got to know each other since.
Absolutely. So that's my sort of perspective in terms of meeting you, and then obviously knowing a little bit more, then going on and looking at some of the things of your channel, and basically something that I aspire to be, I must say, really. And so I want to take this opportunity in terms of our first official stream together with each other, because I know we were on a stream some weeks ago with a number of other individuals. But I want to personally, I can't really stress this enough, really, to our viewers and anyone who will view this after the sort of live event, is that what Captain Swiss has done here, guys, is he has created a network. To us, I think it's probably the only network online in the UK that I am aware of where we have a large number of young political enthusiasts that are basically politics through the day, something that's never been seen before for me personally. And so I think, we underestimate and we don't speak enough, really, Swiss, of what you've created there. So I want to thank you from me personally, first and foremost, for that. And it's been obviously a great honor to meet you sort of online over social media. And no doubt we will be meeting in person as well. And obviously we'll talk a little bit about the reasons behind why we'll be meeting later on in the stream. But that's sort of my sort of introduction, really, in terms of stepping into your world and vice versa, really. But
Well,
over
that's
to you, Swiss. Tell me a little bit about you.
sure. Well, first up, I'll say that's very kind of you. I feel perhaps maybe you give me a little bit too much credit. But I'll certainly take it anyway.
Of course.
I suspect out there online there are probably other groups of a similar-ish kind of vein to what we're in, but they all probably exist in their own little isolated pockets, if that makes sense. Like very much separate from one another, and it's hard for them to find each other. I'll start off from the beginning, just on a few comments you made earlier. I'll tell you what, let me finish rolling this cigarette first, as is tradition in whenever I'm on screen.
Of course.
Yeah, you were saying towards the beginning about sort of you've had an interest in politics for a long time, and you'd always be trying to seek out other people who you could talk about it with as well. And it was reminding me of my own experience, because definitely when I was I think by the time I got to university, I made a few friends that were quite sort of interested in political happenings. But I think before that, it was the case that it would be on nights where I'd go out clubbing or at parties around mates' houses. You'd be out smoking or something, and there'd be the odd one or two people that you'd strike up a conversation with, and that would be, that would be my real choice opportunity. But I get what you mean about venting as well, because I was notoriously bad for this. I'm a lot better with it now, although I probably don't use my personal Facebook that much anymore. But I was one of those people who'd be constantly venting political opinions on Facebook all the time, and sort of became known as one of that guy within the group who ended up doing it.
Absolutely.
Which some people really like, but I suppose the mindset of others is they don't want politics all over their Facebook. They want to I don't know, post pictures of days out at the park or things like that.
Of course.
Where the YouTube channel first came into things, I'd been doing YouTube on and off probably since I was about 13 or so. There's been a few different channels that I've done, but many of them are sort of long since dead and buried now. And it hadn't always been politics. Some of it had just been reviews on things or little comedy skits or animations. I'd always been interested in putting content online. But it was round about... I think it was just after the 2016 Brexit referendum. I'd uploaded a single video to the channel, just sharing a few thoughts on sort of like the aftermath and the discourse around it. And then it was in early 2017 that I started trying to upload stuff regularly again. And I think what spurred me onto that is that I'd been discovering a lot of YouTubers online, both those based here in the UK and those based in America. But at the time, I hadn't been able to find anyone that I describe as having politics that similar to my own. Because at the time, I was sort of I was a very staunch Corbynite and Labour supporter. I'm not that dissimilar now, to be honest, aside from a few issues and party allegiances. But I couldn't really find anyone else who was putting out that kind of point of view, in addition to being Eurosceptic as well. It very much tended to be you'd have clusters of either Eurosceptics who are on the right or pro-Labour people who remain, but you very rarely got a mix of the two. And for a while when I started off the channel, I'm not sure if I had a clear idea in my head of exactly what I was trying to do with it. I think at times I thought I was trying to be my own one-man news broadcasting service. Other times that I was sort of like an unpaid intern to advocate on behalf of the Labour Party, and then other times it was just simply as like a host within stream to sort of bring people in and get a few different ideas. But I guess over time it's sort of evolved into what we see it as now, which is kind of I take a bit more of a relaxed approach to it now. I'm not quite as on the ball trying to stream every single day as I was before, and God knows that's probably a good thing, because it tires you out, definitely. Now you said about the Bullet Club, and that was really interesting how that came about.
How did that form then? Did you just did that sort of, was that organised, Swiss, or was that something that was that something you thought of, that actually this is what I want to do, or did it just happen?
Well, we'd around the YouTube channel for a little while, we'd started to sort of build up a little community of people of sorts, people who'd come on the streams regularly. And I think before we had this Twitter group known as the Bullet Club, I think back when we were still using Google Hangouts, we'd have like day-long hangouts that were always open, that someone would have an account constantly in to keep the hangout open, and people would just keep coming in and out as they pleased, and that was just known as the off-air hangout as opposed to the on-air ones that I did on the channel.
Okay, so would you just be just open for anybody just to jump in through the day kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, anyone who sort of watched the channel or had participated in the streams before, if they asked, "Oh, can I get a link to the hangout?" we'd throw it out to them, and generally speaking, as long as they were nice, they could stick around, and that would work. The story of like the foundation of the Twitter group known as the Bullet Club is actually a lot less glamorous than you might think. There was a short-lived period of time where I was set on making a website for myself. I thought I'll make a website for like the content, maybe write a few articles every now and then, and kind of have that as an additional base for what I do online. It might still be out there somewhere, I don't know. People can go look, but I haven't done anything with it in a long old time. And it was just as simple as there was one page on the site that I was going to use to kind of promote other, kind of what we've been talking about, other sort of young YouTubers who are interested in politics. And there was a page where I'd have like links to their channel and kind of where their politics at and that sort of thing. And the group chat on Twitter really just evolved out of me trying to message about 20 people at once.
So there were about 20 at that point then?
Yeah, it was definitely a smaller number back then, but it was just me basically just trying to message everyone en masse saying, "Oh, hey guys, I'm making this website and I'd like to put your names on. Are you okay with it? Let me know if you'd like to be on it or not." And then I think from that, the chat just grew legs of its own very quickly, that, we all used it as a way to speak to each other. Quickly, it wouldn't just be content creators, but it would be sort of people who watched the channels or friends of ours who would get in there as well. And before we knew it, that...
So at this point, sorry to interrupt, do you think maybe because of what you said there, is it maybe a good time to maybe plug the Bullet Club for us now, that any young political enthusiasts want to join the Bullet Club, want to get in touch with what obviously Swiss is in the middle of sort of explaining and how it was formed, to tweet us or message us on @YouthViews, and I'm sure Swiss, being the creator stroke master of the Bullet Club, should not mind that club going from 45 to where we currently stand to hundreds, because I think that's what would be fair.
I'm absolutely for that, but there's one important thing I probably ought to point out. I think that group chats on Twitter, they've got a hard limit of how many members you can have in each chat. Yeah, I think so, and I think the limit is around 50 or just under that.
Okay, well, so five more spaces. Then.
Yeah, it's it's a VIP list, guys.
Yeah.
But obviously the at the moment we haven't quite pushed ourselves to capacity yet, so we haven't had a problem. But I think probably what would have to be done if we were going to try and bring more people in is try and really sort of set up a proper sort of dedicated Discord server for it or something like that. Yeah. Now, I'm not amazingly well versed with Discord myself. I've only been using it for a month or so. I was talking to someone on it the other day, thinking I was in a private message, and it was on the wall for everyone to see. So I'm still new to it, obviously. But I think that would be an idea if we wanted to try and bring more people into the fold with it.
Where
was over the?
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. So we just
the Bullet Club. Let's do it.
So we just it just gradually brought more and more people in, and for at the beginning at least, I suppose you could have called it a sort of I don't want to say something like the Captain Swiss fan club. It makes me seem far too full of myself there. But it was people around the channel. It was I'd started the channel. It'd be people who were guests on, people who'd watch it, that sort of thing. Yeah. But very quickly it did grow its own legs outside of that. Especially that in the time since it's been made, there's been 1 or 2 periods where I've taken a break from YouTube for a month or two. It's carried on in my wake. So
did you think it would, Swiss? Did you think it would stop though after you took your sabbatical, or were you surprised when you came back and you've seen like 7,462 messages unread?
I was pleased. I was very pleased. I think by the time that I took a break, by having seen how active it was, I thought to myself, oh yes, I think this thing has definitely got the legs to carry on by itself now. But no, I was very pleased about it. But this is the thing that I have to remind people now, that when people ask me about the Bullet Club or whether it's like members in it and what they think of other people or politicians or stuff like that. I have to remind them I'm not really the captain of that ship anymore, so to speak. Like it's grown far beyond anything that I've got any control of. It's just I'm just but a member in addition to everyone else now. Not least as if we're talking about political allegiances, at least, given I'm no longer a Labour member and I'm a pro-Brexit guy, politically I'm actually probably within a bit of a minority within my own club as it goes. But that's what we're after, I suppose, isn't it? You know, you don't want an echo chamber of everyone who agrees with you.
Absolutely, and nobody does, to be fair. I mean, I think it's fair to say to our viewers that we have a mixture of Lib Dems in there. We have a mixture of Labour supporters. We've got a couple of Tories in there as well, isn't there? If I remember correctly, quite not always as vocal, but there is a few in there.
Yeah, a handful. We did have one, Mr. Fielding, who was like a wet Tory, but he's since defected to the Lib Dems.
Later we'll explain what a wet Tory is versus a dry one, won't we?
Yeah.
We have Brexiteers in there. We have Remainers, and our channel. So if you've probably deduced, I don't know if you've caught us since you've followed the account, is that we are very regularly accused of, because my views being of quite left leaning, we are very, very regularly accused of always only seeking the views of those on the left. But as is proven by today's stream and we, you know, and our discussion about the Bullet Club, is that we have a variety of different views, a diversity of different political views, and actually I think it's like you touched on earlier, as long as you're respectful, as long as you are saying things that don't offend anybody, then you're welcome to do it.
Yeah, I mean, even on it's a tricky choice of words, saying things that don't offend anybody. Because one thing that ought to be said about the Bullet Club is it's most definitely not politically correct. Because it's seen as sort of like, you know, when you're there, it's like you're amongst friends. So you know that you can
banter. A lot of it is banter.
You can have banter, you can make jokes, you can make comments that are tongue in cheek and sarcastic and things like that. But yeah, I'd say the overriding principle of it is that you never really want to try and get too personal or nasty at someone just on the basis of political differences. I think that's the overriding philosophy, more so than perhaps saying not offend anybody. Just, you know, I'd put it that way.
Yeah, well, no, that's a fair explanation of it. So then you obviously came back then, didn't you? As you say, in the middle of September, and obviously the group is still running, and you have something that you were basically, your politics journey has evolved, which we are going to touch on a little bit later on, and tell us about the channel now in terms of where you are, in terms of number of subscribers and where you kind of sort of fit at the moment. And
okay. I think we're just shy of 1,800 subscribers at the moment. I think if all goes well, we'll probably hit that in the next week or so. I'd say that my attitude towards the channel has definitely changed over time. Like, I think for an amount of time, I definitely saw it as my overriding goal to like pump out as much content as possible, do my best to grow the channel as quickly as possible, get it out to as many people as possible. Like, forever sort of matching myself up against other YouTubers who maybe had 10,000 subscribers, 20,000, 100,000, and thinking, oh, I've got to get to where they're at. Yeah. But I think more in line with a different attitude that I've taken with things. Like I say, I'm less intensive on myself in terms of how much content I demand of myself now. Like for example, I had a Patreon a while back, which I got rid of just simply because I think it just felt like a requirement. I thought if I'm receiving money off of people on a regular basis, I feel an obligation to do a certain amount of content, and it's better for me overall to jump in and do things when I feel like it. Yeah. But I'd say overall there's a mix of stuff that I try to do. I think the purpose of the channel right now is to sort of jump on every now and then with my thoughts on news or things that are happening within politics. Sometimes that will be giving personal opinions on things that are happening. Other times it's more of a strictly kind of analytical look at things, especially when it comes to like opinion polling. That's that's probably my my favorite thing to talk about. But then aside from that, there'll be a bit of a mix as well. Like every now and then I'll do a stream where I'll throw a link into the club and just bring on anyone who wants to come on. There's a handful of series that I've started doing, which I'm very, very bad, and people will tell you I'm very, very bad for actually getting more episodes out of them. But there's one I do with a chap called Callum where we're working through all the prime ministers of the country.
Yeah.
And I think we've done 7 or 8 episodes now, and we're still stuck somewhere in the late 1700s. So the joke we like to make is that by the time we've caught up to modern day, we'll probably be about 2 prime ministers on from where we are now.
Yeah. Well, at this rate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, it was still Theresa May in office when we started the thing out, so we've already moved on to Bojo. God knows where we go from there.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'd say that it's tricky to pin down exactly what the channel is supposed to be for, other than just to say general political commentary. I'd guess that's the best way to put it. But like I say, we're on about nearly 1,800 subscribers now. I'm less fussed nowadays about trying to grow the thing to the biggest thing it can possibly be. I'm happier with just sort of having an audience that I speak to regularly, coming on and sharing opinions and views every now and then, and doing live election coverage whenever we have locals or generals, which is definitely my favourite thing to do. Yeah,
no, me too. How did you feel, Swiss, then, when I come along with something of similar kind of platform? What were your thoughts then in terms of, oh gosh, here's another one, and wow, how will this work when I'm here and he's here? Or what were your initial thoughts with that?
I wanted you gone. I'm only joking. When I saw what you were trying to do, and obviously it very much mirrored for a while what I've been doing, I thought it was great, because at the end of the day, I think, you know, we say it's hard for me to pin down what I've been trying to do with the channel, but I think one of the overriding goals has always been bring in people who are interested in politics. It was never meant to be young people, but I guess like attracts like. You know, I'm 25. A lot of the people who watch are my age or younger. There are some who are older as well. But I just thought, oh, great. You know, there's another person out there trying to do the same thing, which is absolutely a positive. And sort of that's why when you reached out and you said, oh, would you like to do something together for the election? I thought I would, not least because I know that amongst my audience on the channel, there are people who may have started watching me because of my political views. Say back when I was more staunchly pro-Labour. And then there are others who obviously stick around for political analysis. I've been told by some people on the right who watch the channel that they watch me as like a little bit of colour against the stuff they normally watch, and they'll go, oh, I'll go watch Swiss to see the other side of things as well. So the reason I was keen on doing something with you as well is I think that if I can bring over some of the viewers to your channel as well, then you're filling a niche that I think I mentioned this to you before, but there was a channel that's on YouTube a little while ago called A Up Let's Talk, ran by a guy called JJ. I had the pleasure of speaking to him and streaming with him a few times, but I think he was just a very busy guy in his personal life. He had kids, job, all that sort of thing. And you know, I can say firsthand how hard it can be sometimes to try and juggle YouTube with everything else. So sadly, he's not doing his content anymore. But again, I think he'd racked up a few thousand subscribers. So I know there's definitely people out there who want to see this kind of content.
Audience,
absolutely. I know there's an audience for it. It's just a matter of the audience being able to find the channel. So when I saw that you're looking to do a similar-ish thing to what I do and did, a similar-ish thing to what JJ did, then I thought, well, the more the merrier.
Brilliant. No, I tell you what, and for me, when I'm talking to lots and lots of different people out there on Twitter, certainly the ones who are a little bit older, they're so sort of enthused with the fact that, you know, there is somebody out there that is actively trying to get young people interested, and just to our viewers, you know, we this is not just it. We want to expand this further. Swiss, you and I have spoken about this offline last week, when what we want to do is we actually want to physically go to the streets and sort of engage with young people and sort of with a camera with us. and talk to them in terms of sort of, and actually some turn around and say, look, it's not me, it's not what I want to talk about. It's all right, no problem, but actually that sort of the excitement of approaching people to understand, it doesn't matter what their political views are, but just to sort of capture them, to give them a platform to express them. This is what this is about, really. And I look forward to that. And certainly, I mean, the weather's not getting any better, is it really? But I'm just trying to find that right day where it's just dry enough and not cold enough on a non-working day to do so. So, watch this space, Swiss. We might have to go out and do a bit of a duet on that side of things.
And I think that's a great idea, by the way, because that's not something I've ever really considered before, like going out onto the streets and sort of going, you there, do you have opinions on things? Come chat to us for a minute, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think oh, I've lost where I was going just then. I've drawn a blank for a moment. No, that was it. I think depending on what we're trying to put out there and exactly what kind of content we're trying to make, you can make stuff more accessible to people than it may have been otherwise. Like I know quite a lot of people who tune into what I do, like in a sense, as far as being politically engaged, I'm preaching to the converted. The people who wants to spend their evening on a random weekday watching a person talk about politics for 2 hours. It's usually someone who's already interested in that kind of thing. But what has been nice is there will be a handful of people every now and then who'll say things like, "Oh, I've never really enjoyed watching the news. I've never really been one for sort of for that kind of discourse. But I like hearing you talk about it because you make it seem more interesting, or at least you make it seem more personable." And certainly, you don't have people swearing on the BBC. You don't have people smoking and swigging energy drinks or reading out live comments from the side chat as they're going by or things like that. So anything that can get people to pay more attention to what's going on, I think, is a good thing.
No, you're absolutely right. And I tell you, I echo the same reasons. Is that I would read things on Twitter and then I'd see them on the news, the same news, and I was like, that's not what I've read on Twitter earlier today at 12 o'clock. The way that the news rebrands things is just, so pro-government. It's just unbelievable. So that's one of the things, the motivations for me, that I wanted to go and talk to others and actually kind of expand. Well, what does that mean? What does that piece of news mean? And I watched some of your streams as well, and absolutely found that. So I liken my views to like some of your viewers that actually. I like the fact that Swiss is a bit rough around the edges, and he's just got his energy drink, and he's just smoking a joint or whatever he's smoking.
No, 100% tobacco. I assure you, good sir. I'm running for member of parliament. I can't be admitting to smoking joints on air, can I?
That's a big mistake there. Yeah. No, we can assure our viewers that is the only thing the Swiss is rolling up is tobacco. Yeah. So yeah, all right. Now, I mean, listen, it's been, from my perspective, Swiss, absolutely fascinating meeting you, and can't wait to meet you in person, where we can basically talk politics for hours. And we do are diverse on our political sort of directions, but with mutual respect, we are about we can agree to disagree on lots of stuff. So.
Absolutely. Could I make one final comment just before we move on? Because you just said about how you'd sort of see people saying stuff on Twitter and it being sort of a completely different take or slant on what you'd see in the news, and you sort of said on the news it's often pro-government. I've found that from my time in doing this, and especially from trying to follow people of as many different views as possible, the most interesting thing that I've found is nearly every political camp out there seems to think that the mainstream media is against them. And don't get me wrong, it's not to discount certain criticisms, because I think there's plenty to be made, but I find it fascinating, for example, that you'll have pro-Labour Corbyn people who say much of the mainstream media is against him, which I'd have a tendency to agree. But then likewise, you have, say, Brexiters who say that institutions such as the BBC and other outlets have sort of an anti-Brexit bias. Yeah, but then I've seen sort of your ardent Remainers with the FBPE hashtag or what have you, who end up going, oh, that BBC and its pro-Brexit bias. They're always getting Farage on Question Time or something like that. So and even from like quite a few, there's like a channel I go on with quite a few right-wing people in the country and talk about politics, and their take is well, where they sit on the spectrum, they basically think that the whole media is dominated by left-wingers and liberals. So it's a really interesting thing that I've learned over time, that like finding out other people's views and their take on things, trying to work out exactly what the biases are out there, what the particular slants are out there.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
the media will argue, Swiss, that actually, if that's what everybody from every side is saying, then we're doing something right, because we're not there to necessarily, they will argue, we're not there to please a certain camp, but actually, if every camp is disagreeing with each other, they will argue that is some neutrality in our unbiased ways of reporting. And now I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because I'm looking at it from my angle and I'm saying, well, actually, you could have given a bit more light here, or you could have, but you're absolutely right that you do see on Twitter, your conservatives saying, oh, the media's owned by left-wing hacks. You have your ardent Remainers saying, oh, look, the BBC's apparently the head of editing or blah, blah, blah is a Brexiteer and he voted leave and he's funded by X, Y,
Yeah.
So I find exactly the same, and we take it as we become.
Yeah, and obviously I've got my own, which I've deliberately refrained from mentioning here, just for the sake of the argument I was making. But I've obviously got my own views of where I believe the biases in the media tend to sit at large, and sort of, and obviously it varies as well. Like, the narrative you'll get on something in the Telegraph is very different from that you'll get from the Guardian a lot of the time. You do obviously have some clear differences depending on the outlet, but yeah, I've got my own views on sort of where I think the BBC sits on things, and other outlets for that matter. But it's it's something we can get into while we're discussing.
Well, why don't we? I mean, let's get straight into the election then, Swiss. I mean, one thing that I'm finding, it's a bit of a thugged up election, isn't it? Really, every day you're hearing about a Conservative who's been found sharing this and that on. You've got a Labour MP who's allegedly not put the seat down on the toilet some years ago, and it's caused a stir. It's a volatile election, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I'm just thinking, just to rail things off on the top of my head. You've got Mog comments on Grenfell. You've got Labour MP singing "Hey Jews" on a bus. You've got Baroness Wolsey saying that the Conservatives aren't being serious enough about tackling Islamophobia. You've obviously got the various accusations against Labour of anti-Semitism. You've got Joe Swinson going around saying, "I'm going to become Prime Minister, let me in the debates." And I'll tell you why, and not to mention the divisions between Leavers and Remainers, but that in itself is obvious to everyone in a way. Now, some people would say, like, oh, well, politics has always been divisive. It's always one camp against the other. And in elections, you always get exaggerations and smears and tribalism and stuff along those lines. But I'd agree with you that I feel that it's hypercharged. I do feel that it's hypercharged this election. And I can't quite put my finger on how, but I've been saying on my channel for the last few weeks, when at the back end of this parliament, you had sort of Boris and the government and the opposition sort of fighting it out over if Brexit was going to happen, what the timetable would be, whether there'd be an extension, all of that kind of thing. And I got a sense just from watching it there that it seemed people were going for a sort of high stakes scorched earth policy, as far as people see, it's like it's now all or nothing. For the Labour side, this is our final probably chance to get Corbyn in. For the Tory side, this is our final chance to show the electorate we can do Brexit. For everyone, it seems to be like the biggest stakes that are up for grabs. And I imagine most people would probably agree. Obviously, again, it depends what camp you're a part of, and it depends what your personal outcome you'd like to see for the election is. But no doubt, if you're a Corbyn supporter, this is the final chance to boot those Tories out and sort of bring in a very different set of policies. If you're a Brexiter, this is the chance to finally nail down actually being able to leave the EU. If you're one of these Remainers or a Lib Dem, this is the last shot at trying to overturn Brexit. You could throw the SNP in there for good measure, having another crack at an indie ref too. It seems to be everyone, doesn't it? Everyone's really trying to go for broke on this.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because of the direction that people would argue that both parties are travelling in. You have the so-called cleansing that many would argue in terms of this one nation Tory that is almost arguably the party's moving more towards the right, and then you have a number of anti-Corbyn MPs stepping down. The big resignation last week of Tom Watson is massive news, wasn't it? Really, in respect of his resignation, and is that the end of? Is that the end of? Some may argue is at the end of the so-called voice of what they would call the Blairites within the Labour Party. So I think within the construct that you talk about, and I absolutely am fully in agreement with you, is that I think it's very relative in terms of the directions that the parties are going in at the moment as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like what you've just picked up on there, I'd say there's like mirror opposites of each other. That you've got kind of your one nation conservatives, or as I've referred to them earlier, wet Tories, as opposed to the dries, kind of pulling away, namely because they disagree on the matter. Brexit's been a big divider for everyone in a sense, but that they've been obviously some of them kicked out of the party, some of them choosing to defect themselves, while the Tories go off in a more we'll call it a nationalist position for the sake of argument, not for me to try and specifically label it as nationalist meaning far right, but nationalist as opposed to say internationalist, if you will. And then obviously you've had the same thing happening in Labour now. In Labour, it's been going on a little bit longer because pretty much ever since Corbyn got in 2015, you've had that division between the people on board with the Corbyn project for the party and sort of those we'll term the Blairites who very much resisted it at every turn. So you've seen this in both of the main parties, and it's only been exemplified sort of as amplified even sort of as Brexit has come along as well. That Brexit's got the very unique ability of kind of cutting down the middle of the parties. Previously, where you had like one camp of people whose policies were largely to the left and one camp of people whose policies were largely to the right, or at least in comparison to each other. Now with the Brexit issue, you'll have some people within that party pro-leave, some people within that party pro-remain, and the same for the opposite party as well. And it's made things a lot more difficult to govern those sort of big umbrella coalitions that made up Labour and the Conservatives. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and a lot of it, certainly when I talk from a Labour perspective, is that a lot of them put this Brexit issue as a bit of an umbrella and a bit of a cover for them, really, when actually deep down many of them just wanting Corbyn out. And you can see that, I think, by his Brexit position, which I think from 2017, you may agree with me, that I think that he truly did wish to respect the referendum sort of result. But as the creeping in of a second referendum and the policy sort of position, Corbyn's regularly been criticised by many from within his own party for not travelling in the direction of a second referendum fast enough. And I think that he was doing his best to avoid bringing that policy in because he knew that possibly he may lose a number of votes, certainly the Leave votes that they're also Labour, that the Lexiteers, so to speak. But I think that they did successfully drag him in that direction. And when he did then go in that direction, then there's this brand new concept of, well, actually, it should be second referendum first before a general election. So it's almost like you can't please these individuals, and I think that's had a relative effect as well on where we are at the moment, hasn't it? Yeah, I'd say that I'd say that Labour was always in a tricky position on this, simply because if we want to talk about their coalition of voters or their coalition of seats. You had, your Labour heartland, so to speak, sort of previously industrialised areas, sort of working class Labour vote, that kind of thing. But then you had it sort of juxtaposed with these more city-based, metropolitan-type voters, perhaps more likely to be middle class than working class. Now, I'm talking in broad terms, of course. There's always exceptions to this kind of thing, but like we were saying with Brexit, that really exposed those kind of divisions, and I think that Labour struggled when it came to policy in that sense because they had a large number of MPs that were rather pro-Remain. They had a large number of party members which were rather pro-Remain, but a large number of the seats that they hold voted to leave the EU. And that does make it tricky. So by the looks of it, yeah, from the beginning they were trying to do this sort of middle ground approach where they said we're going to respect the result of the referendum, we're going to leave the European Union, but we're going to go for a soft-ish sort of Brexit, and that's kind of our pitch for a compromise. I think that's what they were aiming for with it, although at times perhaps they could have been a bit clearer on what they were offering. But I do think where it became more tricky is when you had like the People's Vote campaign, when you had the Liberal Democrats and the Greens for that matter as well, taking a much harder stance against Brexit. Then you started to get those within the Labour fold who were anti-Brexit, either drifting off towards those parties or more pressure on Labour to move in that direction. But then there's the flip side. There's the downside, which was voters like myself, just for one example, a Leaver but also a Labour supporter. By the time they'd moved towards the second referendum position, for some Leavers, they view second referendum as essentially, just a mechanism to try and get us to stay in the EU. I know some people will pitch it as, it's pragmatic to have a final say and why not ask the public again, etc. But for many people who may have voted Leave or even voted Labour in that last election, they at the time probably would have thought it unthinkable we'd be talking about another Leave versus Remain referendum before we've left. Now I know that's not the case for everyone. I know that there's still some Leavers who are within the Labour fold, and it may be that they prioritise a Labour government over Brexit, or it may just be, I'll hold my nose and out of the options, this is what I'm going to go for. But it is tricky for them because they've moved towards the second referendum position. They're trying to win back some of those Remain votes that they've lost to the Lib Dems. But in the process now, they're perhaps losing ground with Leavers in trying to win back the Remainers. So like I said, it was always tricky for them because of that electoral coalition. But that seems to be the situation now.
Yeah. I wasn't a second referenda from the start, to be honest with you. I was very much on Corbyn's perspective that, look, we have to get Brexit delivered here now. But I think, and having followed this as you have for a while, where Labour are now, there was probably no way. This is probably the best of a bad situation, because it's impossible in this debate to keep everybody happy, Swiss, and that's really the major issue that they're being faced with. And I think, and this is just my personal perspective, I think had the Conservatives got Brexit done well within those 3 years, I don't think this would be a debate today. And you and I have discussed this offline as well, that the time Theresa May took to go and get her deal from Brussels was far too long, because it allowed the dust to settle far too much, and it started to give, I believe, the Remainers a little bit of a strength here when this deal wasn't getting through Parliament. I think it started to give many of the Remain MPs a little glimmer of a hope that actually, if we stay firm in opposing this, however good or bad the deal is, and this is on both sides of the house here, that actually we may open that door to shine a little bit more light on this. Now that door is it's not wedged, it's fully open now. Well, I wouldn't say maybe there was a period of time when that door was fully open, and this is then swung in backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, where actually members of Parliament have become even more stronger in actually believing that actually we can overturn this result. So that's why I always say that had Theresa May gone, and maybe not necessarily gone before going, recognise that actually there's an arrogance there, because I think that she didn't with that sort of pact or the DUP sort of agreement, I think she was acting as if there were majority government. Well, we soon found out how majority there were in the dying days of this government before it was dissolved, in terms of how a majority there were. So I think it should have been, when she lost that general election, at least she should have said, you know what, this is the time now where we need to sit down and get a Brexit through that the whole House can agree to. And I still firmly believe it was possible, Swiss. I really do. That I think that there was still time then. And we're 2 years on from there now, aren't we? And the problem is that the FBPE crew, the Lib Dems, have almost sort of said, oh, actually, do you know what? We can get political collateral out of this now. We can really take advantage of this massive divide. Rather than bringing the country together, we can really take political advantage of this now and actually increase our seats. You know, you've had a number of defectors from the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I mean, the Lib Dems, excuse me, Swiss, would literally take in a bunch of pedos as long as they were happy to sort of sit amongst them in Parliament. So I think that's what has caused this delay. Had a deal been struck within 12 months of the referendum, and some cross-party honest working in the Commons, I don't think maybe we would be having this conversation that we are today.
See, those are some interesting thoughts, and it's very hard to kind of unpack how things could have gone differently, because you pull on one particular thread and the whole thing unravels. But certainly, I'd say on the part of both Labour and the Conservatives, really, for a long time post-referendum, it seemed to be a matter of tactics more than strategy, if that makes sense. There was a lot more sort of decision-making on the fly. It was a lot more sort of, well, what can we try and get the votes for? What exactly are we after? Like the criticism of May by Brussels, at least, was, you're coming here and you're saying you want to leave, but you're not telling us what kind of future relationship you want. You haven't quite agreed it with your own party. And May's problem was, of course, she was trying to balance a sort of one nation, more Remainer-esque Tories against her hardline ERG bunch, and then the DUP considerations to have to make in Northern Ireland. With the Labour Party, it was a slightly different kettle of fish. You had them starting off from a sort of vague soft Brexit-y position, and then gradually transitioning towards a second referendum position. So I'd say, I mean, I suppose you could argue the only people with any real clarity throughout the process have been the Lib Dems, simply because from day one they've gone, no, we're not having this, no Brexit, no thanks. Not that it's a position I approve of, mind you, but at least someone knew what their view was, at least if it was opposing it. On the prospects of them all working together, could a majority have existed in Parliament for, say, a quote-unquote soft Brexit, say if it was to leave the European Union but to stay within the single market and the customs union, or one or both? Now, obviously, that's not my personal preference, but you could argue perhaps there could have been. But what's really tricky is that we're delving into the realms of the hypothetical here, because there's always going to be party political reasons why Theresa May wouldn't want to bring Corbyn in on it, because her own MPs would be unhappy. That there'd be party political reasons why Corbyn wouldn't necessarily want to jump into bed with Theresa May politically, in order to in order to bring that about as well from opposition from his own side. So
but Corbyn would have been in a much stronger position, Swiss, if she'd have put that olive branch out in the beginning, Brexit done and out of the way. He'd have still had his Heartland's voters on side, because they would have seen that he would have been working towards delivering Brexit. And I think that's relative to what's going to happen this election. I don't believe that it's a Brexit election. I think Labour will do very well to move the agenda towards policy and the domestic sort of things that are going on. But I think I just want to pick up on that point there, that had she reached out and said, look, let's get this done together, Jeremy. And I think he is savvy enough to then would have thought, you know what? I don't need this Brexit bombshell in 3 years' time, where this debate then goes on. And he's now in a situation where he's got the Tories blaming him and calling him a Remainer, right? You've got the Lib Dems blaming him and calling him a Brexiteer, and basically anyone in between calling him an IRA sympathiser and everything else, and an anti-Semite and the rest of it. Like
I had heard someone's take on Twitter, which I thought was quite good, which was Corbyn has successfully managed to convince all the Leavers in the country he's a Remainer, and all the Remainers in the country he's a Leaver.
There you go.
I think I'm probably going to disagree on one point though, which is on the matter of reaching out in the Commons. I think you've got to remember that post the 2017 general election, obviously Theresa May had lost her majority. Labour did a hell of a lot better than anyone had anticipated, and she just about had a majority with the DUP in tow. So I think for a long time the Labour strategy, in a sense, was actually just to stay hot on the heels of the Conservatives, keep trying to put that pressure up, keep trying to say to them, "You're doing bad at this Brexit negotiation. You should give us the go." And with the hopes of that the government would collapse, they'd get an election, and then they'd come in. And obviously, I think what speaks to that being the strategy was the fact that for a long amount of time, you had the Labour Party saying, we want a general election, call a general election repeatedly. And obviously you had the votes of no confidence against May at the back end of her time in, with them trying to get in. So again, I'm slightly more skeptical of realistically whether or not a sort of a big cross-party working out of Brexit ever would have happened. I think it's fair to say, sort of in a hypothetical sense, if it had happened, we may have been able to get the votes for maybe a soft Brexit or something. But I honestly think for both sides that there were very sort of party political reasons why they weren't opting to do that.
Absolutely, and you did hear at that point, well, Corbyn only just wants to become PM. Well, actually, isn't that the aim of Corbyn's game? Isn't that the aim of an opposition, to basically work strategy to make the government look as shit as they are, and to basically use that as an opportunity to move in? What's the point of being an opposition if you're just going to take everything and oppose it? The idea of an opposition, and we are in. The problem is, Swiss, is we're in the most uniquest times in politics than we ever have been. And that then changes the game in terms of what oppositions do, and the general public, because obviously 17.4 million people voted to leave. There's going to be a big voice who are going to make accusations that this guy is not just trying to be politically savvy and oppose everything the Tories do, but he's trying to stop Brexit. And then when we look at this sort of media sort of effect that has on that, it certainly helps that cause, that actually the Labour Party have been possibly hostile to the concept of Brexit, and that's probably why we are where we are. But let's get into this general election and Brexit now, Swiss. What do you think? What's your? I'm not sure if I've quizzed you on this particular one. What's your view of the Boris Johnson deal? I know there's many accusations out there that it's a reheated version of a Theresa May's deal, minus a few bits and pieces and the fixed up bodged so-called backstop. There's been accusations towards, just before an election was called, that there'd be some concerns and issues around working standards and environmental standards, etc., etc. You are, as many of us who are watching the stream know, that you're an arch Brexiteer. You voted leave in the EU referendum. What does Boris Johnson's deal represent Brexit for you?
I think it represents realistically the best shot at Brexit Leavers are going to get at this point. I think that's the honest answer. I certainly wasn't crazy on Theresa May's deal. And obviously, it's true to say that by and large, Boris's deal is rather similar to Theresa May's. There's a small handful of differences, obviously, one of them being the arrangements within Ireland, rather than this backstop, which could have de facto kept the UK in the customs union there wasn't an exit to the backstop per se. So in theory, it could have kept us in the customs union for a long old time. And obviously that was seen as a mechanism to avoid any kind of hard border in Northern Ireland had the UK and the EU not been able to negotiate alternative arrangements. So obviously Brexiters, Tories, myself, weren't necessarily happy about that prospect. So that's been changed. And it's been changed to a de facto border down the Irish Sea. which has obviously upset the DUP votes that the Tories required now, because they've played a bit of a funny game with it, where they're trying to say, on paper, Northern Ireland will be outside of these EU institutions, but in effect, it will be very similar to as if they were. So you could argue maybe there's a little bit of sleight of hand going on there. But to be honest, I'd argue, I'll put it this way. I'd say that if it was a straight up choice between the prospect of either a hard border across Northern Ireland, or B, being stuck within the backstop forever, versus this new proposal with essentially a border down the Irish Sea, it's certainly not perfect. I don't think there's any resolution to this situation that's perfect, but I'd say that it's preferable to the one that we had previously. It's not without its issues, but I'd say it's preferable. And then on the matter of other aspects, I know that Boris has changed the political declaration, which was like the document that came attached to the withdrawal agreement. Now, the political declaration itself, I don't think is actually legally binding. But it's basically a joint statement of intent between the UK government and the EU of what kind of relationship they're looking to bring about in the future. And if I'm correct, I think that's where a lot of these concerns from opposition parties have come about, things such as workers' rights and things along those lines, because the declarations they've put out does not put in place as similar guarantees to us copying and following European standards on these things as the version underneath Theresa May had done. Now, again, it depends where you sit on the issue, because it's like, if you're a more Boris-minded person, I suppose you could say, their vision of Brexit is to try and separate ourselves from the European Union more so than Theresa May have liked to done. But with that brings the benefit of, deciding, your own policies when it comes to, not just workers' rights or standards, but trade deals, the whole shebang as far as having a say over what your policy on things is going to be. Whereas May's was sort of, May's, as I saw it, was sort of like almost like a Brexit damage limitation. She was like, I'm going to bring us out. I'm going to try and bring us out the institutions, but by and large, we're going to try and shadow things as much as possible. So where the criticism would come in, as I see it, is obviously the likes of the Labour Party and no doubt other people on the left, and indeed a fair few Remainers for that matter. They take one look at the possibility of a Boris-led majority government and the idea that would be separated from the EU, and straight away they think, well, hang on a minute, this is going to give, if Boris has a majority in the Commons, this gives him a free rein to do what he likes. Now, it's not to say that the Tories would or wouldn't shred all of the workers' rights in the country or anything like that, but I suppose it's the fact that there's the scope for them to do so, and that's probably what one of the main concerns is. But the argument that I'd make on this, counter to that at least, is that what kind of laws we have in this country, and what kind of how we operate ourselves once we're out of the EU. Ultimately, it's going to be a matter for the UK government to decide, isn't it? It's going to be a matter for whoever can command a majority in the House of Commons. Now, I'm not especially infused by the idea of having a conservative. I'm not especially infused about having the idea of a conservative government, full stop. But not least with some of the things they may choose to do post Brexit. But at the same time, I think the thing people need to remember is, especially now that we've got an election on as well, a government will only govern if you've had a majority of MPs in Parliament sent there by the voters. It's not about trying to say we don't trust Boris Johnson, he may do X, Y, and Z. It's about trying to say to the voters, this is our pitch that's different from Boris Johnson's, and you want to vote for us because our pitch is better. Because at the end of the day, whoever ends up getting a majority in the Commons at the end of the election, they're going to be the ones deciding the future of the country. And although I'm not a big fan of first past the post, I certainly think it's got its own problems. That is the way that we do our democracy, and that is the way we deliver a mandate to the government. So I find it a little bit tricky when it's sort of said, oh, we don't like these terms of leaving the EU because of what a potential government might do. Simply because I think that the government that's elected by the people is the government that's been given the mandate to govern by the people, whether or not I may like or dislike that particular government. Yeah.
So what about this one then, Swiss, in terms of the conversations that are taking place about Boris Johnson and this the alleged sort of checks that would or wouldn't happen on the Irish border? I'm just bringing up an article now so that our viewers can see. I don't know if you can see it on screen there, Swiss.
Yep. It's a little bit small for me. I'll see if I can bring it on full screen or not.
Well, there are all sorts of accusations going towards Boris Johnson around him not understanding the deal. And if you remember, in the couple of weeks before Parliament dissolved, there was this embarrassing sort of tennis match of what would happen with these checks and paperwork and whatnot. We had Stephen Barclay in a Brexit select meeting backtracking and first saying there wouldn't be any checks or paperwork, and then a few minutes later admitting there would be. Then you had Priti Patel on the stand some days after or the next day saying that no, we can rest assured that there wouldn't be, and then it was raised that there would be, and there was all sorts of a roundabout around that. A few weeks on, obviously now with the general election, there's all sorts of talk around it being in the legal documents that there would be checks taking place on the borders, in terms, not necessarily on the borders, but in terms of goods coming across and whatnot. And then we have obviously this video that had been leaked where Boris Johnson was in Northern Ireland answering questions to businesses, where he again emphatically states that there wouldn't be any paperwork. And quote, I think he said something around the lines of, if anybody asks you to fill in any paperwork, I will tell them to throw it in the bin. Well, what do you make of that?
Oh man, where to start with that? I mean, first up, from what I've heard about it, at least, Boris may have wet his whistle a little bit that evening. So he might have had a.
Have you seen the video, Swiss?
I've seen a bit of it. Yeah.
He looked as pissed as they come.
Yeah. So the fact that he's had a little tipple certainly means that he's not on best form for coherent Boris Johnson policy explanation. But I mean, to be honest, I've never really thought Boris has particularly been one for details anyway. I don't honestly believe that Boris Johnson has sat down there and poured through every line of his own deal and all the rest of it. I think that he's the sort of politician that likes to be at the front of things, likes to be the one talking to the public and to the cameras, but more likely behind the scenes, he's likely to delegate the responsibility of finding detail to others. Yeah. So as far as like whether Boris has an understanding of what's going on with his own proposals, there are two ways of looking at it, aren't there? One is to say that he doesn't have a clue at all. And he's just making things up on the fly and kind of saying, oh, yes, we're going to have an absolutely fantastic time. And, no checks, no paperwork, nothing. Whereas, in fact, the official advice may be otherwise. Or if it may be, and I don't know the mind of Boris Johnson, perhaps he's thinking, oh, well, if I run away after this election with a great big stonking majority, then I've got even more scope to go and try and renegotiate something even better than we've got at the moment to avoid those kind of issues. But to be quite honest, the thing that I'd say on this is fairly similar to pretty much anything I'd say that comes from Boris Johnson, especially if he's had a few drinks, which is just to treat it with skepticism all round. To be quite honest with you, like the fact that this has happened and the fact that this is our prime minister, maybe it speaks to the day and age we're in at the moment with like Donald Trump in America. On Twitter every day of the week and stuff like that, but yeah, it might be almost quite defeatist and apathetic to say it, but I'm not even fazed by this kind of thing anymore. Like I just kind of accept it for what it is, and I think, yeah, that's the situation. That's where we are right now. We've got the Prime Minister drunk on camera who doesn't seem to understand his own Brexit policy.
Yeah. But do you think he does get it though? You've been very diplomatic there, Swiss. Genuinely, in your heart of hearts, do you think he gets it? Like, I mean, he's out there mumbling something out, and yes, he may have had a couple of drinks and whatnot, but He knows he's being.
I think he. And again, I don't know for sure. I think he understands the rough points of what his deal entails. I obviously believe that as Prime Minister.
He's clearly got that wrong, hasn't he, Swiss? He's got that wrong, hasn't he? I mean, there will be. It's all of the political correspondents have said there will be paperwork needed in terms of the travelling of goods across those areas.
Oh, no. To be clear, I'm not necessarily saying it's a matter of whether he does or doesn't understand it, but just that if he's had a few drinks and he's in front of an audience that he wants to play to, he's gonna say anything that sounds good to the people he's in the room with. Yeah, because that's Boris Johnson. I suspect that, like, I don't think he's an expert on his own deal. I think he's probably been briefed by the relevant people on the key points of it, the key talking points of it, and roughly what it will entail. But I think a separate thing to consider is that Boris Johnson has a very loose relationship with the truth. Yeah. And if the setting is right and the context is right, he'll say any old thing if he thinks it will sound good to people.
So you're saying he's a liar?
Yeah. Generally speaking,
he's a liar. Let's be honest, and I think he's very much into pleasing.
But in the interest of fairness, though, I will also say what politician isn't. I think we'd be hard pressed to point to probably anyone who's been in the Commons who hasn't been saying falsehoods or mistruths as well. I think Boris is certainly prolific for it. But it's not to say that others haven't done the same.
I would argue, as I would, and many will accuse me of, I would say that Jeremy Corbyn is probably the most honest of politicians and principled of politicians.
Here's a question for you then: whether or not you would term something as a lie. Say, for example, a year or two ago, Jeremy Corbyn was saying we don't support a second referendum, we shouldn't have one, the people have already decided. And then 2 years later, he's saying we should have a second referendum, this is the right thing for the country, etc. Some people would frame that as saying, oh, well, he's changed his mind, he's listened to the membership of the party, he's doing what's pragmatic. Other people would say, hang on a minute, he said one thing at one point, now he's saying the other thing. Was he lying the first time round?
The first time, absolutely. And I think in answer to that, Swiss, is that you and I and people who know a little bit about this and we follow this, is that we know actually that Jeremy Corbyn has been a well-known Eurosceptic for a number of years, and you only have to look at previous clips on his opinions of Europe and our involvement with Europe to know that actually he's probably in terms of being honest to himself about what he truly believes, gone far past the line of where he would have personally committed. But what I would say is that where do politicians draw their line when, especially you're a leader of the party that's quite broad in terms of the different wings that they have, and I think actually he has been pulled in a direction by many of his shadow cabinet and whatnot. And you've got to remember, many of these decisions are not always personally based. They're about actually what is befitting for political opinion. And I think the way that the Brexit situation has travelled in terms of the logistics of how it's moved around and Parliament and its acceptance and getting a deal through, as I said earlier, that I think that the Labour Party have almost had no choice but to, like you've got a sort of the government in place who are ready to obviously go and negotiate a deal and bring one back. You have the Lib Dems on the other side who are actually taking up a very extreme position of revoke. The Labour Party can only now actually be in between there and offer what they would name and label as a sensible approach, i.e. giving the people another say. And here's my thing, Swiss, right? And many will disagree with me on this. I don't know where you stand on it. That actually, if Labour do come into government, they win the general election and they go to Brussels and negotiate a deal, right? It would be absolutely and utterly stupid for them to then come back and hash out another conference and say, well, actually, we're going to take a Remain position and campaign against a deal that they have gone and negotiated themselves. And that's when Jeremy Corbyn could be accused of being dishonest and a number of things. And that's why I think that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, in terms of how it is, how it stands at this moment in time, is a very important election in terms of the identity of the Labour Party, in terms of how it's constructed in this next Parliament. Because if Mr. Corbyn has enough supporters on side, I think he will be in a position, Swiss, to be able to say, right, none of this campaign against our own deal bollocks, right? Whatever the Brexit deal that we go and negotiate, we will look like the biggest twats in the world if we go then and campaign against it. We have to back our own deal and do as the Tories were doing when they were in government, that look, this is the deal, and argue that this will protect jobs and protect the economy and the environmental standards and all the things that they were fighting for pre-general election and within the general election. And that's where I think they will miss a trick if his parliamentary party drag him further towards a Remain position. So that's kind of answers, I think, your question around I don't think he's been dishonest or disingenuous. I think he's been pulled in a direction, but he has every chance of repairing that honesty or lack of supposed honesty if he backs the deal that they go and negotiate.
Oh, okay. There's probably a bit to unpack on that. The first thing I'll say is, like I said earlier on, when I said that Labour was always in a tricky position with this, coalition of voters of Remainers in the cities and Leavers elsewhere. It's not to say that there's any silver bullet resolution to this that I could suggest and go, oh, if only Labour had done this all along, then they wouldn't have had any of those problems. So I'm not criticising from a point of saying that I know better and that what I would have done in Jeremy Corbyn's shoes. Although if you had to ask me what my preference would have been, I would have said, don't go for a second ref, stick with your soft Brexit pitch, and then at least it's relatively consistent all the way through.
Yeah.
But what you picked up on is a really good point, which is right now, because Corbyn's instincts are obviously Eurosceptic, but he's gradually been sculpted by the leadership position and those around him to have to take a more pro-Remain line. And he's kind of been pushed into the second referendum via pressure from others, as far as I understand. But you're absolutely right that the idea of their policy to be, right, we'll get into power, we'll negotiate a new Brexit deal, we'll then put that Brexit deal to the public versus Remain. But given that there's a fair number of MPs in the party who already take the view, well, no deal is better. Sorry, not no deal as in no deal, but there isn't a deal that's better than staying in the European Union. So regardless, we're going to campaign for staying in the EU. I think Emily Thornberry was on Question Time the other day, and she got tripped up over it in a sense, because she said, oh yes, I'd campaign for Remain, in almost the same breath of going, and we're going to negotiate a much better deal than the ones the Tories have. But I think in a sense, probably the damage has already been done on that. Like, I struggle, like we were saying earlier about, Remainers thinking they're Leave and Leavers thinking they're Remain, because in my view, there's been far too much policy triangulation on this. There's been far too much trying to pursue what is seen as the route that will lose them the least amount of votes. Because we'd always said they're going to bleed out from one end or the other. But because of that, I think in a sense that there are voters now in this election that I don't think are going to be won back by the pitch that they've got. We've seen some movement in the polls that some people are returning towards Labour, as are the Tories as well. Like, I think as the campaign goes on, we will see both main parties' numbers continue to climb up a little bit. But I think at this stage in the game, after 3 years or so of the process, in the case of the Labour Party, you're gonna have those leavers who say, I'm sorry, but if you're backing a second referendum, that's an anti-Brexit policy in my view. You're going to have the ardent Remainers who say, well, if you're planning to negotiate your own deal, you're not even anti-Brexit enough in my view. But you've also seen a similar-ish thing, I'd say to a lesser degree, but a similar-ish thing happening within the Tories and their split between the Brexit Party vote as well. That you have some people who back the Brexit Party now who no longer believe that the Conservatives are dedicated to delivering Brexit, and that if they got in with a majority, they'd go on for more and more extensions and water it down and this, that, and the other. And again, this comes into when we were talking about earlier about different people's perceptions of, say, media bias, depending on where they sit on the spectrum. We've got this remarkable situation as well as far as the parties go on Brexit. You've got opposing views of where Labour stand on Brexit, and with the Tories on Brexit, you've got one camp of people, let's call them, like the opposition parties, left of centre, generally Remain, who seem to genuinely believe that if Boris had the chance, he would take us out with no deal, and that's his first preference. But then you've also got people now backing the Brexit party who refuse to budge back to the Tories, who no longer trust the Tories to do Brexit and think the only ones who would do it are Nigel Farage. So again, it's a lot of it comes down to where voters are sitting on the issue and what their interpretation of things is going to be. But just bringing it back to Labour again for a second, whether you want to personally refer to it as Corbyn not having lied on it but simply changed his position, or whether we're going to call it him being forced into it, or a bit of triangulation, or what have you. I think at this point, unfortunately, there's been just enough alienation of probably both the ardent Remain and Leave camp that they're really going to struggle to get that electoral coalition together. That's my view. I could be surprised, mind you. I have been surprised before in politics.
Polling is one of your interests and areas, isn't it, Swiss? And it's suggesting that, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you love polls. I absolutely find them abhorrent, to be honest with you. I comment very less on them. I don't like polls. They make me very nervous. And you saw, I'm sure, some of those screenshots in the Bullet group earlier around some of the questions that YouGov have been asking and how one-sided they were. It just puts me on. I find them abhorrent. They're climbing, aren't they, Labour now? And then some would argue that I think political commentators are arguing, and people like Aaron Bastani are arguing that that they're clawing points from the Lib Dem Remain vote side of things, and they're also, this is an interesting one for me, clawing Brexiteer points from the Brexit Party. Where do you stand on that? Do you agree with that, or?
I'll give you sort of a quick rundown of things as I see it, if you like. I've got a screen share if you want to put that up on the screen. Just because there's a line graph. Yes, there we are. All right. This page is my Bible, by the way, because it updates all of the polls that come in a lovely table for everyone to see. You've got who's in the lead and by what amount, and then up here we have the grand old. It's the moving average graph. So the line is made up of I think every point in the line is like an average of where the parties have been at in the last 10 or 15 polls.
And it covers different polls, does it, Swiss, as well? Is this like the polls of polls?
It's the poll of polls, yeah. Now you may well see other polls of polls done by other people that will have slight differences. They may include or exclude one or two pollsters that the other ones don't, or they may say we're only going to have one poll a week from a certain pollster rather than all of the polls that this pollster does. So you're always going to get slightly differing results even with polls of polls, but generally speaking, because of the nature of how averaged out they are, they give a fairly good impression. So just looking at all this activity in you can see it on the screen share, can't you?
Yeah, of course,
yeah. So just looking at all this activity here, obviously we can see that the biggest real change in things came about in the first half of this year, sort of after the deal failed to pass, as we got towards the EU elections, when the extension had happened. You had Labour and the Conservatives both dropping down, the Liberal Democrats and the Brexit Party both climbing up, and the Greens to a lesser degree as well. And obviously you can argue there's a fairly obvious sort of headline explanation of it, and it's the Brexit Party were there saying we're very pro-Brexit, the Lib Dems were there saying we're very anti-Brexit, and the two parties that were perhaps expected by some of their voters to be a bit more hardline one way or the other fell down as a result, because these very clearer messages on Brexit were coming along. But if you looked at what's happened in the meantime since, I think it's very interesting, because pretty much the point that the Tories continue to climb back up is the point that Boris Johnson took over. And I think that's because, people who had been inclined to vote Tory previously, they lost faith in Theresa May to get the job done on Brexit, but they were won back over by Boris with his whole, I'll do Brexit, do or die, get in a ditch on the 31st, whatever it might be. But I think there was an analysis from some people who said, oh, and when Boris hasn't taken us out by the end of October, the penny will drop and everyone will go back over to the Brexit party because they'll see Boris as having betrayed them on it. But from what I understand from my own perception and that of other leavers I speak to at the very least, they're a lot more likely to blame the MPs in Parliament for Brexit not having happened than Boris Johnson himself. So if you look at this overall trend that we're seeing, the Tories in polling are almost, not quite, but almost roughly back to the level where they were before all this movement occurred.
Pre-Boris Johnson.
Yeah, but back to where, but basically they're almost back to where they were pre it becoming obvious that we weren't going to leave the EU on time with Theresa May. And you can see that the Brexit party's obviously been diminishing in an almost equal scale, not quite, but you can see that the two are somewhat correlated to each other. But with Labour and the Lib Dems, it's been a lot more tricky. Like, again, you've seen Labour drop down, you've seen the Lib Dems climb up. And as I've said before, it's not a direct one-for-one, like only Remainers between Labour and the Lib Dems, only Leavers between the Tories and the Brexit party, because, like, you know, that Labour had some Leavers in it, you know, that some Tories have gone to the Lib Dems. So there's differences around the edges, but broadly speaking, for the sake of this at least, we'll describe it as being along those lines. But if you look here, it's been a much trickier game for the Labour Party in recent weeks. Like, you see pretty much since the election was called, you've seen the Tories shooting back up to where they were. Labour, they've made up some ground, and it's also worth me mentioning that this line graph, because it's a several point moving average, it takes a while for new polls to get adapted into the graph that you're seeing. So it's perfectly possible that rather than Labour being here right now on the basis of the most recent polls, they might be like here or something like that. But the picture that we're seeing overall is that it's harder for Labour to win over Remain voters than it is for the Tories to win over Leave voters. Or to put it another way, Leave voters, by and large, and I'm
sticking with the Tories.
Yeah. By and large, Leave voters are willing to go wherever they think Leave will happen, whereas Remain voters' priorities are a little bit more mixed, I'd say. And this is just like a personal assessment off the top of my head. This is me kind of generating numbers just from what I've perceived, but I describe it as being along the lines of the Leavers. Let's say 2/3 of them are very ardent Leavers that will go wherever it takes to get Brexit done. Of the Remainers, perhaps only 1/3 of them are ardent Remainers that will go wherever they need to go to get Remain done. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing playing out. That it's easier for the Tories to pick up Brexit votes than it is for the Labour Party to pick up either Labour or Remain votes at this point. And I know, obviously, I'm only analysing this through the prism of Brexit, and there are other factors that play, plenty of domestic factors and party leadership factors and things like that as well. But just looking at it through purely a Brexit analysis, that's the take that I'd give you on it.
No, and it sounds a fair take. I think what I would say is that there's a significant sort of drop now in the yellow bar, isn't there, in respect of the relevance of the Lib Dems, and a rise. I mean, I think, and you know, this could be general election bounce, as they call it, in terms of new policies and discussions taking place around policies. And interesting that the Tories still climb. And the next thing I wanted to come sort of over in terms of discussion was lies being told in this general election, Swiss. I think we talked about dishonesty a few minutes ago, but we had this morning in terms of the discussion on Sophie Reed show. I'm trying to find a link for it now, but I can't find it. Where Kwasi, remind me what Kwasi's surname is? Kwarteng or something.
Kwasi Kwarteng.
That's the one.
That it? Yeah.
That's right.
Tory MP.
That's right. Tory minister, I think. He may be a Tory minister. I'm not sure.
Okay, right.
For it while I'm sort of discussing it. But he was on Sophie Ridge this morning, and he was discussing the costings that the Conservatives had done for the Labour so-called manifesto, etc., etc. And he was. You probably seen Swiss, the spread that was on the some of the Sunday papers this morning about 1.2 trillion it would cost for Labour's manifesto to be sort of carried out and delivered. It would cost the taxpayer X, Y, and Z 1.2 trillion. Sophie Ridges, I must say, I mean, you know, and this is when they're interviewing with both sides or all parties. She gave him quite a difficult time, to be fair, because she firstly sort of pointed out and said, well, actually, I've spoken to some of the people that you're talking about in the Labour Party, and actually every policy that you've costed up doesn't necessarily is not going to be one of the delivered policies. That some of it is come from conference in terms of wishes to deliver, but not necessarily stuff that's going to make it into manifesto. But she quizzed him 2 or 3 times on, well, actually, you've carried out these calculations for Labour's manifesto. What are you guys going to spend? And so he tried to swerve the question by saying, well, you know, we're going to spend 150 billion on the NHS. And she said, okay, that's the NHS. And what about the rest of it? Well, we're going to spend a little bit over here. And she said, okay, Kwasi, I think you're probably getting where I'm trying to ask you. You've done an estimation or a forecast on the spending for Labour in terms of their delivery of manifesto. What's your equivalent figure? So you measured them at 1.2 trillion. What's the Tory sort of figure? And he said, oh no, we don't want to be banding figures around of that stuff.
Yes.
we wouldn't be dreaming of the.
See, I didn't even see the interview, but I can imagine how it went because I've seen that sort of thing before. Yeah.
And she was able to just absolutely destroy him and say, well, here you are holding Labour to account about their manifesto and whatnot, but you're not even prepared to talk about your own figures and how the costings of that would be. So I would say if this was any other general election, I mean, that's a deal breaker, isn't it, for the moderate or the undecided voter? But yet, with boo-boos like that and many others that we could go into, but I'm sure many of our viewers have watched the news and seen what has happened over the last sort of week, and the disastrous start to the Tory campaign, they still are climbing in the polls. So does that suggest that actually the accusation that this is a Brexit election, do you think that stands then?
I'd say I'll just say on the matter of figures for pledges and the rest of it. I think realistically, it's quite reasonable to say that probably what Labour is proposing is likely to cost more than what the Conservatives are proposing. That makes enough sense, and that's probably been true for every election since the beginning of both parties being competitive against one another. But obviously, yes, on the basis of whether or not it will be 1 trillion or not. I think it's likely that the Tories will probably have wanted to jack those numbers up to the biggest, most outstanding thing it could possibly be. But yeah, I think there's definitely a case of what do they say? If you live in a glass house, you shouldn't throw stones. And it definitely seems like it was a bit of an own goal for them to go, you know, big spreads on the front pages. Look at all this money that Labour's going to spend. 1 trillion, isn't that incredibly irresponsible? All of that extra spending. But given that probably some of Boris's pledges are the most frivolous the Tories have been on spending since they came to government in 2010, and the last time they were in power, I was 3 years old. So the most frivolous they've appeared in spending in my lifetime, at least. Yeah, there is very much a sense of, well, if you're not going to cost your own policies, then it's a lot harder for you to attack your political opponents on what you're costing their policies to be.
Naive, isn't it, Swiss, to come on a show to attack the policy of another or the costings of another, but not even have the foggiest to be able to have an answer to when that question's going to come back your way?
And I can probably hazard a guess, because again, I expect that. At Tory Party HQ, they've probably got all these internal reports that they've done. They've had internal costings, and there'll be briefs that they've given to ministers or the Prime Minister. They'll probably have a rough idea in their heads of how much this is going to cost, because they're the ones making the proposals. But obviously, they don't want that to be made public. I imagine because the Tories are very much, generally speaking, seen as the party of not the party of cuts, or if you're a Tory supporter, sort of the party of economic responsibility. You know, they don't want to be seen as spending loads of money and sloshing it around. And obviously Boris, although he's not pledging to spend as much as Corbyn is, he's taken a slight departure from the sort of the years of austerity May and Hammond in terms of his pitch. So I think the problem is that if they were incredibly forthcoming about how much they were going to spend, it could well alienate some of their own base. Because their own base would go, well, hang on a minute, I want you to be much, much tighter with the purse strings than you're planning to be. Yeah, even though it's the case that even if they did come out with costings for their proposals, quite a lot of Labour voters would probably go, well, we don't believe you anyway. We'll think you'll get into power and you won't spend and you'll just cut some more. So So I think it was a misstep of them, obviously. From their perspective, we're the Tories, we're economically competent, we're going to attack Corbyn for spending loads of money, which he probably is going to spend lots of money. But the real, the real blind spot for them was the fact that they've made quite a few spending pledges themselves, and they also haven't costed them. So I agree with you on that.
Finally, on polling, before we move on, Swiss, where do you see this chart ending up on the?
Goodness me!
You're on the spot there, haven't I?
Yeah, just a little bit. Let me think. So far, the polls, the movement in the polls since the beginning of the election has panned out broadly similarly to how I thought it would be. I thought we'd see the Tory party going up to the detriment of the Brexit party. There were some around me who was still thought, oh no, you know, that all the Brexit voters will abandon the Tories once we haven't left by Halloween. Obviously, that hasn't panned out now. I think we may continue to see a bit more of a squeeze in that sense. I think there's perhaps a few more percentage points that the Tories could get off the Brexit party. But I'm gonna label that as a given. Basically, I think that by the time we get towards polling day, you know, bar some ridiculous gaffe that nobody can foresee or something along those lines, I think we'll see the Tories on average polling in the low 40s. Okay. The real question, I think, is that's not to say the result will be in the low 40s. The polling will be in the low 40s. But the real question, I think, is going to be, in terms of this election being competitive, how much Labour can do to make up their vote share, how much they can try and win some support back from, it will probably be the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, at least on a national level. But then there's one aspect that makes predicting this election a little bit tricky when it comes to just looking at the national polls. And that's the idea that obviously in certain seats, you've got some parties that are going to be standing down for other ones to give them the best shot at a pro-Brexit MP or a pro-Remain MP and things like that. So even the levels of support that we see on the national level aren't necessarily going to filter down to each constituency. Because, you know, you may have some constituencies where it's going to be a straight up battle between Labour and the Conservatives. You might have another one where normally it's a battle between the Lib Dems and the Tories, and the Greens have chose to stand down. You might have another one where the Brexit party's standing aside to help the Tories beat Labour or the Lib Dems. You might have another seat where the Brexit party's standing, and feasibly it could take some votes away from both Labour and the Conservatives. So national polling figures are only going to be part of the story in this election. We can use it as a really sort of blunt instrument to measure a rough level of national support, if that makes sense. But how exactly that's going to filter down into each of the constituencies is really, really hard to model for, from what I understand, which is in part why we're sort of paying more attention to constituency polling in this election, because that's the snapshot that's going to help us out.
But from what you're saying, Swiss, we're talking, I mean, I'm not a polling expert, we're talking a slim Tory majority, aren't we, from what we're saying? Yeah.
If I was a betting man, and I am, and someone said, "How do you think it'll pan out?" I'd probably say a slim Tory majority. At the moment. Okay,
no problem. I am an optimist, and I'm going to go for a 2017. I'm going to go for an absolute increase on that. I think that the Labour campaign will be fantastic. I'm just looking at some of the numbers that are going out and canvassing on Twitter for the Labour Party. I'm going to just go out and make a prediction that I think Boris will be unseated in his own seat, to be honest with you. A big one to make, I know. But I think that just from echoes of people I know inside within the constituency, and just from looking at some of the activity that's going out there, and given the volatility of Brexit and the London Remain sort of contingent, I'm going to be going for Conservatives to lose. I don't see a Labour landslide, although that could happen. I'm not saying that it can't happen. Anything can happen. But I'm going to be going for a decrease in Tory seats. At this moment in time, that's what my prediction is, a decrease in Tory seats, and probably enough seats between Labour and the SNP to muster a little bit of supply and confidence. That's what I think. And if that does happen, it's probably a great result for the Labour Party. Failing that, I still would say, if that doesn't happen, I still see probably a Labour minority government in place. I definitely see a decrease of seats on the Tory side. I think that anything can happen, obviously, because obviously the Brexit Party being a pressure grouping around and whatnot. I think that the Conservatives have lost too many, I don't know why they call them One Nation, but Conservative moderates. I think that the realisation of which way
if I may, the Blairite wing of the Tory party.
Yeah, you could call them that. Yeah, absolutely, the version of Blairites in the Conservative Party that are probably going to go in the direction of voting Lib Dems. That is probably going to break the votes and probably help some seats to be won by Labour in some of these areas. So, like I say, anything can happen, and where your predictions lie, you're obviously much more expert in how the polls are working and whatnot. I've turned off polls ever since 2017, to be honest with you, Swiss, because I cannot believe that lead was clawed back.
I mean, it was phenomenal what happened in the 2017 campaign. I'll say this for polls. First of all, I'm certainly by no means always correct on these things. That there was one point in the campaign in 2017, I made a video, which may well still be up on the channel, where I declared triumphantly something like "Labour will form the next government." And actually, if I'd worded it differently, I could have claimed to have been more accurate, because in the video I said I thought it'd be a hung parliament with Labour able to cobble together a majority.
Yeah.
Obviously, that didn't quite pan out either. But it was the one thing that I'll say for polls, even though there's this sense of us saying, well, the polls always get it wrong. They always seem to be off the mark on how things are going to end up. Yeah. But prior to the last election, about a day or so before it took place, I went through constituency by constituency, every single constituency in the country, trying to do a rough estimate of who I thought would end up winning the seat. And I was off the mark. I was way off the mark for Northern Ireland. I'll just put that in its own box aside. I'm not very well versed on Northern Ireland politics, but in terms of the rough headline numbers of like where the Labour Party ended up, where the Tories ended up, where the SNP and the Lib Dems ended up, I really wasn't that far off. I was only far off by single digits in some cases. Yeah. And the thing I'll say is I wouldn't have been able to have made those predictions if I didn't have polls to assist me in doing that. Part of it was polling, part of it was kind of a sense of gut instinct. But I'd say that polls can be very useful, but it just depends what way you use them. That's that's the takeaway I'd give you.
No, absolutely. And I'm not discounting them, but like I say, I think if any party can claw back that lead that the Labour Party did, I absolutely think they can do it again, and I can think they can go one step further. So, we live in hope for our respective views. I'm just conscious that we're going over the time. A couple of things that we want to, because I do want to give due diligence to your personal ambitions and whatnot before we finish. But
if I can make a suggestion then, because I was going to nip off and grab another drink. If you wanted to field any comments from people or something, I can go grab a drink and roll a cigarette, and then we can discuss the MP bid just before we go. Yeah. All right, I'll be back in a second.
No problem. Okay, while Swiss goes off, guys, let's have a look at some of the comments that we have had through the evening. Let me just scroll up. So we've had a number of viewers on this evening. Thank everybody for coming in and viewing. We have here. Let's have a look. question for Swiss. I know Mr. Cooper is asking, question for Swiss, since you're a Brexiteer, got asked, do you want the Tories to get a majority? And I know sort of Swiss has made his predictions regards that, but he's back. I'll let him answer that when he's set back in.
Hello?
Yeah, James. John Cooper asks, question for you, Swiss, since you're a Brexiteer, I've got to ask, do you want the Tory to get a majority?
I think if I wanted the Tories to get a majority, I'd probably be voting Tory in this election. The really tricky position I find myself in is that I never want to see the Tories in power, but I don't want to see a force in power in Parliament that will stop Brexit from happening either. And I know there's no easy resolution to that. It's likely to probably be one or the other at this stage. So for my own sort of personal troubles with that, and especially me trying to figure out how I wanted to vote in the election, through lack of a better option, that quite nicely leads us into why I'm running in a way. But it was simply because I really couldn't state a preference in this election. Like I've got such strong feelings about both who I want in power domestically versus what I want done on Brexit that I
struggle, isn't it?
It's been a real struggle for me, and it's something that I felt that I was going to have to deal with sooner or later. Like I could see this coming for a few years, what's going to happen at the next election. But but my solution to that, in a sense, is if I'm standing in my seat, I can vote for me.
Well, let's come on to that then.
Sure.
We nice and neatly move into that area, and I know we've gone over the time that we said we would, but let's give this a nice little bit of time. Now, my friend Swiss here is running to be an independent MP in his constituency named Stoke North and.
It's Stoke North, but what a lot of candidates do, which I copied, is you add and Kidsgrove in the end, so Kidsgrove doesn't feel left out because it's not technically part of Stoke-on-Trent.
But the constituency itself, for anybody who's out there and searching,
Stoke North or Stoke-on-Trent North. Yeah,
Stoke-on-Trent North, right? Okay, and that seat is currently held by a well-known Labour MP by the name of Ruth Smeeth. Is that correct?
Ruth Smeeth, yeah, she's been it's been a Labour seat since it was made in the 1950s, but it's been held by Ruth Smeeth since 2015. Okay. So over to you, Swiss. I don't want to go rambling on about this, and I want to first of all congratulate you, because I believe that you crowdfunded your deposit, your £500 deposit to actually get to run for this seat. So I want to first of all congratulate you on doing that. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to go into that, and what's your plug for this election? Oh well, I suppose to start with, I should come clean in a way that as much as I've pitched this as sort of here's my moral dilemma of who I vote for, I know I'll stand for MP instead. I have long thought about running for office, and I have long thought about the idea of becoming an MP one day. But I've it's kind of been like a bucket list sort of thing, or like you know how some people say, I want to be an actor, or I want to be a footballer, or it's not necessarily the most realistic of things, but it's like if you could have any dream job or something like that. So it's something that I've long thought about doing, but this election really offered the best opportunity, I guess, simply because, as I say, I was faced with that situation of not having someone on the ballot I wanted to vote for, and I am fortunate enough, having built up this platform as well, that when it came to raising money for the deposit, I had quite a lot of good people around me who'd like to see what would happen if I end up running. Initially, I think my pitch was, I kind of thought, well, if I'm in this situation and I don't really have a party that I want to vote for, like I traditionally am a Labour voter, but I don't like where they've gone on Brexit. I'd like to see Brexit happen, but I don't want to vote for a right-wing party like the Brexit Party or the Tories. What do you end up doing? So my initial thoughts have been, well, if I've faced that kind of dilemma, perhaps there's others in my seat who feel that same way as well, not least when you consider that Stoke-on-Trent North has been a Labour seat, as I say, since creation, but also one of the heaviest voting Leave constituencies in the country as well. I think it's like the 10th most Leave constituency or something like that. So you know, if you could personify a constituency, you could say that that constituency is kind of a similar crossroads I've been at on this whole thing. So I thought maybe it might be a good match in that case. You never know. So that in a nutshell is kind of what led me to think, well, I'll give this a try. I'll see where I can go with it. Those were the first thoughts, at least. Yeah.
What are your policies then? What are you going to do differently? I mean, I was going to say, what are you going to do differently from Ruth Smith? I mean, I know you do a lot differently from Ruth Smith. You certainly won't slag off Jeremy Corbyn as much as she has. But we won't go into that, guys. We won't go into that tonight. But yeah.
I will say I'm doing my absolute best to behave myself and run a rather positive campaign, which means that I'm taking great lengths to try not to talk about opposing candidates too much, and to try and focus on my own platform.
And hence why I moved it away from there in terms of what are you personally pledging for Stoke North?
Well, my platform has been sort of an evolving creature, if that makes sense. Having started off with basically some national policy positions, and obviously, you know, the same that everyone has. What's your view on what's going on? How would you vote this way or the other? What's your stance on Brexit? But I've also been able to at least identify issues within the constituency, things that I think ought to be addressed. So I'll start off with the local pitch if I can, and then I'll move slightly on to sort of national footing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm just sharing, while you are doing that, I'm just sharing the screenshot of today's article in the Stoke-on-Trent Live website.
I feel I ought to say just before I get into it that the reason I'm sat in that cafe holding my hands up like that, the chap who was interviewing me seemed really interested by the fact that I had tattoos for some reason. Yeah. So he wanted to get in the frame me holding my tattoos up for a picture. So that's that's why I'm posed like that, rather than sort of like a half-hearted hooray or something like that. So as far as Stoke-on-Trent, the general area goes, it's dealt with deindustrialisation over a number of decades. It had a lot of industry jobs which have since shut down or been greatly diminished, and that means that obviously the number of jobs in the area, the sort of overall economic activity in the area, that's been on a big old downward trend for a long old time. And then as a result of that, you get sort of similarly linked things, which is homelessness, drug use on the streets, higher levels of crime, things along those kind of lines. Certainly, the fact that funding to like youth clubs had been shut down, in the last decade or so as a result of cuts, that hasn't helped things out either. So you've kind of got that situation on the one hand, and obviously that's a big thing to have to try and tackle. I'm not going to sit here and suddenly go, I've got this silver bullet that's going to fix everything that no one else could think of. But at least we can identify what the overall problem is there, and we could say, right, okay, if it's the case of jobs having disappeared from the area, the solution is to try and bring jobs back to the area. We know that's what we've got to try and do. It's just trying to find a solution for it. But the other situation with my constituency specifically is Stoke-on-Trent is, or the Potteries as it's known locally, it's made up of, well, it's a matter of debate amongst some locals. It's made up of 5 or 6 towns. I'm going to say 6 towns for the sake of it. And one of them is Hanley. And Hanley is our sort of commercial business hub, if that makes sense. It's the one where most of the shops are. It's the one where a lot of the businesses are headquartered. It's the one where they've sort of pedestrianised parts of the high street. It's the most done up bit of Stoke, if that makes sense. As opposed to the bit of Stoke that's actually called Stoke-on-Trent, which is known by the locals as Old Stoke, which is kind of just a rather empty looking high street at this point. But part of the problem, as people say, is that Hanley has had a lot of attention given to it recently, and rightly so, because from what I've heard, there's been big improvements on it since how it was before. There was a big issue of a bus station being torn down and completely rebuilt, and it looks pretty nice and modern. But from the people that I speak to, there's a real sense of they feel that Stoke-on-Trent Council is paying a lot of attention to developing Hanley to the detriment of the other towns around Stoke as well. And within my constituency, Stoke North, you've got within the towns of Stoke-on-Trent, at least, you've got Tunstall and Burslem. I live in Tunstall. Burslem is about a 10-15 minute walk down the road. So that's going to be part of the focus as well. If we're going to look at kind of on the national picture, trying to instigate policies to try and bring about some activity back to Stoke, on a more local level, it's a matter of trying to convince Stoke-on-Trent Council to spend some of their funds in the other areas of Stoke, not just Hanley, where they're going to be putting most of the resources. Because, to be honest, some of the places around here, you'll have back alleys behind terraced housing with like fly tipping. You'll have rubbish in the streets. You've got high streets, which are basically just charity shops and takeaways, buildings that are boarded up, listed historical buildings that have been part of the sort of local heritage of the place and, go back to the time that they were actually used as factories or stuff along those lines that have basically been left derelict. Whether they've got an owner for them or not, they're basically just standing there in freefall. And there was one example recently of what used to be a teapot factory. And the owner hadn't, the private owner hadn't done what was necessary in order to make it safe because the place was falling into disrepair. And despite the council getting on their case and some rudimentary works being done to it, it was deemed eventually, no, we've said this thing is unsafe. In theory, it could topple over at any point. I'd actually been and seen the place myself before part of it got torn down, and to be honest, there was a slight element of the building kind of leaning ever so slightly forwards towards the road it was in front of. So I can understand the reason that they go, right, we've got to tear it down. But I think the problem is, from what a lot of people have said, and I'm inclined to agree, is that they feel annoyed that it was allowed to get to that stage anyway. And it really sort of exemplifies the situation all over Stoke, that there are lots of these buildings that might have historical significance, or even ones that don't, but again have still been left to be boarded up or derelict. And it's just an overall sense of people feeling that they're not having any attention paid to them, that people don't care for trying to make their towns nicer and a nice place to live, and almost
and
like
there are many constituencies like that, aren't there, up and down the country? And when people talk about that kind of feeling amongst places that maybe high Brexit voting and also a sense of post-industrialization or being left behind, I can absolutely see the correlation there. So what I'd be looking to do in that sense, and again, I've tried to be very clear with people that I know that a lot of the things, if it were a matter of me getting in on day one and being able to pull a few levers and press a few buttons and go, right, we're going to give more money to that, spend more money there, send some people over to sort that out. But what I've come to realize quite a lot is actually a lot of these things are the responsibility and the decision-making of Stoke-on-Trent Council, which is presently, I believe, a coalition of Conservatives and Stoke City Independents. So there's only so much that I could pledge to do for people and then face the reality of getting in and perhaps not being able to do it. So I'm trying to be cautious in that sense of not, trying to say that I'll over-deliver. I'm trying to give statements of intent rather than cast iron. Yeah, exactly. I'm not trying to promise people the world and then have them be disappointed, because God knows enough politicians do that. But as far as overall priorities go, I'd say try and find a way to bring some jobs back to the area. Try and find a use for some of these derelict buildings, especially the historical listed ones, which don't have a use for them at the moment. And as far as trying to get the council to pay more attention to the places outside of Stoke go, because, the council can obviously argue, well, our budget's been cut. We don't have as much money to work with as we used to. We've got to make tough decisions as well. We can't quite fill in all those potholes just yet. I'd say what is within my scope to do as MP, I think, is that if I were to get into the Commons, I may be able to take a vote in the House of Commons to increase the central government grants that goes to councils. So I can't necessarily tell the council where they've got to spend the money, but at least I can say to them, well, look, guys, if I'm able to, I'll vote for you to get more money from central government. You've got more to play with in the area now. So at least now maybe you can start spreading the love a little bit to, not just centralizing most of the spending in one place. So that in a nutshell is like my overall vision of what I'd like to try and do. And then tied into that in terms of places where I think spending should be prioritized are things like funding youth clubs again, trying to tackle homelessness. But then does that make enough sense so far? I'll move on to sort of national policies, if you like. Totally. And look.
Okay.
Go on, sorry, yeah. No, carry on.
No. You go. Oh, all right. So I was going to say that's kind of the pitch for the area as I see it at the moment. And then as far as a few sort of specific policies go, like obviously, as I've said, I'm pro-Brexit, so I've got a rather clear stance that I want to try and see Brexit done. For me, that would mean. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you there.
Oh, sorry. No, well, that's what I was just saying. That I was precisely going to ask you when I interrupted. Then is how Brexit ties into your vision.
Yes. As far as how I'd be voting in the Commons for it, I mean, first of all, just if we're going to talk about a vision here, we talk about the sense of people being left behind or not feeling that they're listened to, and certainly from people I've spoken to, some of them have at least said, well, I don't vote because I don't believe that anyone I vote for is going to do anything for me. Yeah. And then I guess, whether you agree with Brexit or not on a personal level and whatever you think the impact of it might be for the country, if you've got a large number of people voting for something, I mean, I think in Stoke North, I think it was like 7 out of 10 people who voted in that referendum voted leave. So, yeah, quite a heavy margin. So I think if you're going to try and get any kind of faith back into politics again, then it's worth saying to people, well, step one is doing the thing that you voted for all that time ago. Maybe that's a good way to go. So on Brexit, at least in the Commons, I've got 2 plans for whether it's a Labour government or a Conservative government. If it's a Conservative government, I vote for the withdrawal agreement. Fairly straightforward because that's the deal that's on the table. If it's a Labour government, obviously their policy is to negotiate their own deal and then put it to a referendum versus Remain. Yeah. I've obviously been against a second referendum for a long while for sort of reasons that I've explained to you already, because I don't feel that it respects the result we've already had. So what I'd say is I would not support the move for them to have a referendum unless it could be amended to a choice between 2 leave options. So say, for example, Labour were to go, right, we've negotiated our new deal and we think it's even better than the ones the Tories had. So now you, the public, get to decide, do you want our deal or no deal, or something along those lines.
Leave options only, yeah.
Yeah. So that would be what I'd be looking to support in that sense. And then just quickly, because I know we don't have an awful lot of time left. A few other things that I've put to people. Number one, I would try and introduce a private members bill. That's the mechanism for regular MPs who aren't necessarily in government to try and put their own laws forwards in the House of Commons. I'd put forward a private members bill to bring in a mechanism for constituents to have by-elections on their MPs if they defect party.
Yeah, I know. We talked about this one,
because we don't have that at present. And the example I always pluck out there is Chuka Ramuna, just because he was that prolific with it. But obviously, he went from Labour to Change UK. I think somewhere there was a stint as a non-Change UK independent, and then over to the Lib Dems as well. But despite all of that party chopping and changing, there was never a say for the constituents. Now, maybe in his constituency, they don't care and they love Chuka Ramuna anyway. But I think that it's certainly in other seats, it's been the case where there have been MPs who've represented, Remain MPs in a very strong Leave area, Leave MPs in a very strong Remain area. Anna Soubry perhaps is a good example. I think her area is quite Remain, but then she moved over to Change UK, no by-election. So what I'd look to do on that front is just introduce a mechanism where at the moment, if an MP is suspended from the House of Commons for a certain amount of time, say if they've broken the law, then there's an opportunity for their constituents to go and sign a petition. And if that petition reaches a certain threshold of signatures within an amount of time, then there's a by-election. And I'd essentially just be looking for something similar for if MPs defect party. Have a petition out there able for the constituents to sign. And if enough of them have signed up to it, then you get to have a by-election to decide if you want to keep that MP you elected in the first place, or if actually you're more fussed about the party.
You'd get my vote alone for that reason, right? I think that's an excellent policy because, let's be quite clear here that we could be in a situation with what's going on or what has gone on in the Labour Party where, and Joe Swinson did talk about this the other day, where a number of MPs, even after the election, could defect to another party midway through the term or some weeks into, and that's what makes this a very, very volatile era of politics at the moment. Absolutely. We saw the Chuka Ramuna group do it back in, I think it was March of this year.
Because how do you know what you're voting for? You know, how do you know what you're voting? Because I know, and again, I'm just doing a single example just to pluck out the air. But for example, I know that there's friends within the Bullet Group. They're sort of Labour supporters. They've been on board with Corbyn for a long while. They like the policies that he's putting forwards, but personally, they might actually live in a seat with a Blairite MP, for example, and they may not necessarily like that MP, but for the sake of trying to get Corbyn in, they'll hold their nose, vote for them for the sake of putting it towards a Labour government. And then, say if you get in the Parliament, that Blairite MP then defects to the Lib Dems or to an independent, then suddenly you go, oh right, well I voted you in, but not for the platform I think I was voting you in for. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what your policy that you're talking about would no doubt safeguard and prevent that from happening. And that's why I would welcome that, because I don't get me wrong, I think many of the defectors from the Labour Party, and I'll be watching their results very, very carefully on the 12th of December, and silently I'll be smiling to myself when Chuck Ramuna is having to visit the job centre.
I can see you've already got like the Mr. Burns hands, just sort of excellent. You know, you're really relishing it, aren't you? Yeah.
Oh, I would absolutely love it. And for that reason, just without having to sound repetitive, just for that reason alone, that I think, you stand on a platform of a party that has delivered a number of things, and you go to the ballot box because you want your free social care and you want your money pumped into the NHS and possibly your Brexit position within those thoughts, and when you put your little cross in the box, yet to find your MP then has absolutely sold you and your vote down the river by joining another party is absolutely flabbergasting. And as I say, and I'm just got our guy Lucas Barner, a regular on the show, has commented tonight. I've got to say, I like that policy, he says.
Oh, jolly. And what I've been really pleased to hear as well, because you know me, I'm always trying to find things that appeal to, try and find out what consensus there is in the country for stuff that actually appeals to people on the left, the centre, the right, across the board. And actually this by-election for defecting MPs, it actually seems to be quite popular across the spectrum, to be honest. So that's a real positive.
Well, if Jeremy Corbyn is listening to this stream, I doubt he very much is. But if he is listening to this stream, Mr. Corbyn, this is probably one of the first things you need to do should you win the next general election, that this is a policy that you need to enact and take through. And God help you, Swiss. Hopefully you're sitting there with him, right? Not far from him, and supporting a motion like this. And finally, on this point, Swiss, I mean, on behalf of Youth Views and all of our viewers, and anybody who's associated with this channel, is that we want to wish you the best of luck. On a personal note, I feel that you are a unique individual that is able to relate to people, and that's from different backgrounds and a plethora of different parts of angles of life. But more than anything, what I found is your ability to communicate and deliver your point in an absolutely brilliant manner, and again, without sort of needing to slate or comment on any of the other candidates, is that I think your value base will be very, very much appreciated and needed in a new era of politics that we are hopefully about to embark upon. And the only bit of advice that if I would give you is, don't leave out what you have done in terms of the creation of the Bullet Club. I think that your campaign, given the era that we're in, the technological era, needs to be a lot more focused on the online reaching out, and how that you have used this medium, Swiss, to engage a number of young people into not just your politics and your ideas, but actually open the platform up. Don't underestimate that, Swiss, because that is a massive, but certainly for me, it's a massive, massive thing, to an honor as well to be talking to, I would call you an influencer That's the word that I would use, right? And I think that what you've created there, although some of it you say, well, actually, maybe wouldn't have been in intentions to do so, or it wasn't in the vision, and it was accidental. Don't underestimate that that's you behind that, right? And I would advise, and I'll talk to you more offline about this, is that I think you need to be bringing in how you can reach out through social media into your campaign. I really do. And
thank you. And I will take what you said into consideration there, because it wasn't an aspect of the campaign I'd thought an awful lot about. Sort of my background with trying to bring in people of different politics and engaging them, but certainly if there's a way that I can, if there's a way that I can try and get that across to people and use it for some benefit, then absolutely, I think it's worthwhile. Do I have time just to speak about one more thing just before we go? Just on the matter of policies, and you were saying, how can I try and set myself aside from other politicians as well? Some people are very supportive of this. Other people see it as a little bit of a gimmick, but people will take their own view on it. But the other thing that I've said is that half of my earnings as MP I'd be donating to local charities.
Yes.
And the simple reason for that is, well, first of all, we know that the public, by and large, thinks that they're sick of hearing about these MPs getting all their pay rises when they don't think that an awful lot's happening in Parliament, or if they think they were perhaps overpaid a little bit in the first place. We're still in the after effects, like a decade or so on from the expenses scandal. So trust in MPs is at an all-time low, and there is that. And I'm not saying this of any individual MP, that's not the purpose of this, but there's that sense, isn't there, that some MPs, they're in it for themselves. They want to get on the gravy train, and they want to just make some money off of it and make all their connections.
Career politicians.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think at least that that is a way, first of all, to do some good without even necessarily having brought in a new law or anything like that. Even if I'm not successful with my private members bill, I can at least say, well, I've helped out some of the charities in the area a little bit. But also I think just to try and set myself aside and show that I'm about something a little bit more than just getting elected, to try and say that, there's some values there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think that will certainly go a long way with people who are fed up of career politicians, and I think we've discussed it enough on the Bullet Group about parachuted politicians and what have you. And I think what's also important is that you've been in the area you've been living there for 3 years now, haven't you?
Getting on for, yeah.
So the area well, and that will go some way as well. Finally, I know this was on our notes initially. Swiss, you wanted to very quickly talk about debate, the prospective debate that is taking place over on the next few weeks in the news channels.
Oh yes. We might have to be quick on this, just because I've got to leave for work in about 10-20 minutes. Is the other thing.
Go on then, let's make this point quickly then.
Let's make it a quick one then. I thought we may get into this at some point. Obviously, we've got the proposed debates coming up. I believe ITV had offered one between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Yes. Joe Swinson felt rather left out, and she was saying, well, I should be involved in that. And now I'm not so much against party leaders doing their best to get them, muscle themselves in on the debate scene, because it's obviously in their interest, isn't it? They want to try and get the biggest audience possible. They want to have access to their platform, and they certainly want to be seen on par with the people most likely to become prime minister, because again, it may give voters that confidence to think, oh, they might actually be able to make it. But the one thing that I wanted to pick up on, which has really reminded me a little bit of Hillary Clinton when she ran for president, actually, is like this sort of very heavy emphasis that seems to be coming from Joe Swinson on the fact that it's not just that she should be included in the debates, but the fact that the debates are set at the moment to be between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, who both happen to be men. It's somehow a sort of slight against women, the fact that the female party leader hasn't been involved. And I found first of all, I don't really agree with that way to sort of try and trade off of it on that aspect, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering if you had similar views on it, and we'd probably.
Well,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think first of all, I'll say that my dislike of Jo Swinson is such that I'm happy whenever I see her pissed off, right? So I can't admit that. Did you hear as well that because initially it was the ITV debate that had disincluded her. I think there's another one. I think it's is it the BBC one that is now also going to include Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn only?
I think, yeah, from what I've heard, it was the ITV one, Boris and Corbyn. Then Sky News proposed one which would have also had Swinson in.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the other party leaders have responded to that one with. And then recently, yes, the BBC have pitched another Corbyn Johnson one.
And so there's all this talk then about sort of legal action and whatnot. I mean, what that will achieve, God knows only, because these things would have passed by the time anything gets to court. So here's my thing: is on a personal level, I'm actually not displeased to see. I don't think she's helped herself, because I think she's pissed off a large section of people when she starts talking about her going and realistic, thinking that she has a realistic chance of becoming prime minister. I think she's using this newness of being a party leader and this new enthused party of the Liberal Democrats now to think that she's wrecking the country with her bulldozing it with the policies and this stop Brexit thing, and I think that's probably why there hasn't been so much outrage over this. On principle, though, I would say that I think all debates should include all party leaders, and I say that selfishly as a Labour voter and supporter, that actually I think the public should be able to see how good or how bad each of the three main parties are against each other. I think that will help, because look, let's be honest here. For the TV companies, this is about TV ratings. Nothing more, nothing less. It's about revenue. It's about TV ratings. It's about listings, right? But for myself as a potential voter, and potential voter, and looking at millions of others who will be watching and tuning in those shows, they want to know what they can get if they vote in this election. And I actually think, and I would extend that actually people in like local Stoke BBC, for example, should be inviting all of their local MPs and candidates to eat, just as what we have tonight, give you an opportunity to showcase what you as an MP, as an independent, has to offer Stoke North. So I think that should go up then in terms of national level. Yes,
I agree with you to a degree, by the way, because I would also. I mean, here's the thing. I think that if we're going to talk about like a race for the PM debate, you might say realistically it will either be Johnson or Corbyn. But I would also like to see, in a similar vein to we've had in previous elections, you know, the ones where they have the spread of 7 or 8 candidates across the stage, and it's the leaders of every single major party standing in the election. I'd also like to see that in addition. I'm not saying I want to discount that just to have one-on-one debates between Corbyn and Johnson. Just my issue with the idea of having it's like you can have a debate with all the candidates, you can have a debate with the 2 people most likely to be PM, but the issue with including Swinson into it and making it a 3-way debate is you go, well, hang on a moment, Swinson might be the 3rd largest party in terms of opinion polling at the moment, but she's the 4th largest party in terms of MPs right now behind the SNP. Yeah. So then the SNP might say, well, hang on a minute, we've got more representation, so we ought to be involved. But then the argument would be, well, you're a national party. And then Farage will probably perk up and he'll go, well, hang on a minute, we're polling 4th place in the polls. We're going to get much higher vote share nationally than the SNP would. So we should be involved in the debate as well. And before you know it, you're arriving at the point where it's just the multi-leader debate anyway, where it's going to be all of them.
Selfishly, Swiss, I want that to happen. I want Farage to be taking Boris on in these debates about their disagreements over this Brexit deal, because selfishly, again, as a Labour voter, I want to be able to go out on the doorstep and say, look, this is your Brexit, right, that they're talking about. They can't even agree on it themselves, right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to... Yeah.
I'm not against additional types of debates and additional formats. Just the one thing I think is we ought to have at least one debate that's just Johnson versus Corbyn. I'm in favour of others with all the parties and even matchups in between, say if Swinson wanted to challenge Corbyn on Brexit and Farage wanted to challenge Johnson on Brexit or something like that. I think honestly, the more debates, the better. But just the one thing I'm opposed to is the idea of not allowing a single debate with just Johnson and Corbyn.
And hence that's why I said earlier the comment around she hasn't helped herself by throwing her hat into the ring for being PM, because she's not going to be. It's not going to happen in a million moons, and she needs to really get real in terms of where her party sort of stands. So I think, look, we've covered that one well, Swiss. I think we've covered loads and loads of issues. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I can see from the comments, and apologies to everyone on the comments that we haven't been able to get everything on. I guess that's just a testament to our conversation tonight, Swiss, that we've been able to do this. Listen, Swiss, I definitely want to do something more regular like this. We are in election period, and this will probably go like really, really quickly. I think we should certainly coordinate something for election evening as well. But obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about that offline. Is there any sort of final things that you want to say about tonight's stream, and anything in summary about yourself before we head off?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me on. I appreciate you reaching out and wanting to sort something out, and I'm happy to have had a place on your platform. Makes a difference from having people over on mine to be guesting on someone else's every now and then. So thank you very much for that. And I would like to do something more regular as well. I think at the very least, perhaps next Sunday in a similar vein as we've done this week. I'd be available to do another one if you'd like. And then just to sort of do a quick bit of a plugging for myself as well. My YouTube channel is called Captain Swiss. You should be able to search for it on YouTube and find it fairly easily.
I don't know if you've noticed, Swiss, we've had it throughout on the screen in the banners at the bottom. So we've
excellent. All right then. So people have seen, have they? And of course my name's displayed as Captain Swiss as well, which helps out. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Captain Swiss. That's Captain spelt CAPN Swiss, like the pirate Yar. And then of course also I've got my campaign for MP at the moment, and that's under my real name of Matt Dilworth, which it's been very interesting for me outing myself as like a real person aside from just Captain Swiss in the last week or so. You can also follow that on Twitter. It's MD and then the number 4 MP. And there's also a page on Facebook, which is Matt Dilworth for Stoke North. Even if you don't live in the constituency, but you just like to follow how I'm doing with it and perhaps share it to some friends who may live nearby, then that would be really handy. And yeah, as I say, just thanks for having me on.
No, brilliant, Swiss. I've really, as I say, enjoyed it, and you need to shoot off to work in a minute, so I'm going to let you go. Listen, guys, thank you very much for listening. As per, we want to get this a bit more regularly, and like I say, we'll post more details on Twitter. Maybe next week, Swiss, we might get a couple more people on just to sort of get a bit more of a diverse range of views, but we'll discuss that offline. Listen, guys, I've been Youth Views. We look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thanks for bearing with us. And we look forward to hosting a lot more topic of conversation on politics and current affairs in the next few weeks. Take care. God bless. Good night.
Catch you later.